in Wonderland.
One beautiful spring day, a young girl named Alice sat by the river listening to her sister read aloud from a history book. But Alice wasn't really listening. She was playing with her cat Dina and daydreaming. The sun was bright and the air was warm. Soon, Alice began to close her eyes. She no longer heard her sister's voice. Suddenly, a large white rabbit dashed by. Alice jumped up. The rabbit was wearing a waistcoat and a bow tie and was carrying a huge pocket watch. I'm late for a very important date," the white rabbit muttered as he went along. Alice went chasing after him, but stopped short at a rabbit hole. The rabbit scuttled down the hole. Thinking he might be late for something fun, like a party, Alice followed him. Suddenly, she stumbled and fell head over heels into the hole. But instead of falling faster, she began falling slower and slower, until she was floating. She landed gently just in time to see the rabbit disappear through a tiny door. Alice was too big to follow him. The doorknob suggested she tried a bottle on the table, which said, "Drink me." Alice drank and drank. With every sip, she got smaller and smaller. When she was ready to open the door, the doorknob told her that he was locked. Then he suggested she try a biscuit from the box labeled "Eat Me." Alice did, and she began to grow. Soon she was crying giant tears. The doorknob told her to drink again. She grew smaller and smaller until she could float right through the keyhole. On the other side of the keyhole, Alice found she was in the strangest place. There were talking birds and walking fish and a Cheshire cat who kept appearing and disappearing. Alice kept hoping that one of these creatures could help her find the white rabbit, but they were no help at all. She came upon a pair of twins. They introduced themselves as Tweedledum and Tweedledee. "How do you do, Tweedledum and Tweedledee?" Alice greeted them. She could not tell them apart at all. "When first meeting someone, you should shake hands and state your name and business," said Tweedledum, grabbing Alice's hand and shaking it firmly. With that, the twins danced Alice round and round, but they were so rough that they flipped her over, knocking her onto her back. Alice was not pleased. "Talk about manners," Alice exclaimed as she picked herself up. "If you must know, my name is Alice and I'm following the white rabbit. I'm very sorry, but I must go." At last, Alice spotted the white rabbit in the yard of his cottage. He was worried because he couldn't find his white gloves. "I'm late," he exclaimed to Alice. She offered to help, and the two went to search inside the house. While outside, Alice took a bite of some food labeled "Eat Me." She immediately grew into a giant, and her long arms and legs crashed through the cottage's windows and doors. The white rabbit panicked. He couldn't believe what a mess Alice had made, and ran to get some help. Meanwhile, Alice searched for something that would make her shrink again. She plucked a carrot out of the white rabbit's garden. As soon as she ate some of it, she shrank to a tiny size. As far as the white rabbit could tell, Alice had disappeared. So he gathered his things and left in a hurry. Alice tried to follow him, but she couldn't keep up. After a while, Alice found herself in an unusual garden. She was delighted by all of the strange things that surrounded her. Odd bugs, including bread and butterflies and a rocking horsefly, flew through the air. Most of the flowers were taller than her, and they could speak. "What kind of flower are you?" a daisy asked. "I'm not a flower," Alice replied. "I'm a—" But before she could explain, the flowers decided that Alice was a weed. They told her to leave their garden. Next, Alice came to a caterpillar sitting on a mushroom. "Who are you?" he asked. "I hardly know, sir," Alice answered. The caterpillar told Alice that eating some of the mushroom would help her. "One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter," he said. "Which is which?" Alice wondered aloud. She broke off a piece from each side. Alice took a bite of one side and shot up taller than the trees. She even scared a bird that was nesting on a high branch. Alice began to understand how she could use the mushroom to control her height. She took small bites of the other side. Each time, she shrunk a bit more until she reached her regular size. Finally, she was back to normal. Alice wandered back through the forest in search of the white rabbit. Then she saw the cat again. "Which way should I go?" Alice asked. "That depends on where you want to go," the Cheshire Cat said. "However, if I were looking for a white rabbit, I'd ask the Mad Hatter. But I don't want to meet mad people," Alice said. "Oh, you can't help that. Most everyone's mad here," the cat replied, and disappeared. Alice still didn't like the idea, but she did want to find the rabbit. So she walked along the path to the Mad Hatter's. Alice came to a strange tea party. The Mad Hatter and March Hare were celebrating their unbirthdays. They invited Alice to tea. When they discovered that it was Alice's unbirthday too, the Mad Hatter and March Hare gave her a cake. As Alice blew out the candles, the cake shot into the sky like a rocket. A dormouse holding a tiny umbrella floated down and landed in a teapot. Alice had never seen such nonsense. Alice was just about to leave the party. Then, to her surprise, the white rabbit ran by. He looked at his watch and cried, "I'm late!" After that, he ran off. Alice followed the white rabbit, but she lost sight of him. Just as she started to lose hope, the cat reappeared. He showed Alice a shortcut, and she entered a fancy garden. There, she watched some playing cards paint white roses red. Suddenly, the white rabbit ran into the garden. He was there to announce the Queen of Hearts. When the queen saw that some of the roses were still white, she was furious. "Off with their heads!" she shouted, pointing at the poor playing cards. Then the Queen of Hearts challenged Alice to an odd game of croquet, using roly-poly hedgehogs as the balls and flamingos for the mallets. The queen began to win, but only because she cheated. The cat suddenly reappeared. Alice spoke to the cat, but he hid himself from the Queen of Hearts. The queen thought Alice was teasing her and cried, "Off with her head!" Alice started to run, but the queen and her guards chased after her. Alice ran until she reached the talking doorknob once more. "I simply must get out," she pleaded. "But you are outside," the doorknob said. "See for yourself." Alice peered through the keyhole and saw herself sitting in the tree with her cat Dina. She realized that she was in a dream, and she wished that she would wake up. Sure enough, when Alice awoke, she was back in the tree. It was a lovely afternoon, and there wasn't a bit of craziness. That was just fine with Alice. Thank you for watching, and see you at the next story.